The DS technically should not have happened. If we look back 20 years ago, the hot thing was graphics and power. Gaming was evolving at such a rapid speed thanks to technology, and everyone just wanted to see how good games could look. Gone were the days of calling consoles by how many bits they had. Now we could have an infinite amount of them, and the 4 companies at the time had to sell this to the masses.
Listen, man, I like bits, but this is way too much for my needs.
PlayStation was focused on giving crowds a good deal by making the PS2 a cheaper DVD player than most dedicated devices. Xbox aimed their sights towards more serious gamers and showed how the Xbox was leaps ahead of the competition in terms of performance. Sega was dead. There was no saving them from this race, and Nintendo was in hot pursuit right behind them. The GameCube wasn't looking too great in the eyes of the people. Not only was the controller off-putting to those who preferred the DualShock, but the discs were proprietary to help prevent piracy. Something that people didn't want unless you were trying to break that lock to the great open sea. They wanted a full-size disc that can hold more data for games. This meant developers had a difficult time working on the GameCube, so less games came out for it. With low sales and low third-party support, Nintendo needed to shift gears into what really works for them. Since the Game Boy Advance was met with booming success, they needed to make a new handheld. But it couldn't have just been another Game Boy. No, it needed to be something that caught people's attention. It needed to be crazy. It needed to be nothing anyone's ever seen before.
This is the Nintendo DS.
Holy f***ing shit! That thing has 2 screens! Can we get it, Mom? Please? Please, Mom, can we get it? It's gonna be so cool, Mom. Please, Mom, can we get it? I know I'm 23 and I can buy it myself, but I need your permission in order to get it, please.
You see, screens are a funny thing. We went from small piss-poor quality to large to wide back to small to whatever you'd call this. But ladies, gentlemen, and all non-binary folk alike, let me introduce you to Screen Squared. How the fuck do you play games on this thing?
Everybody and their moms were wondering the same thing. How do you make a screen dual mitosis and expect it to work in tandem with the original while making the games still feel fun?
Believe it or not, there was a way. In the early years of the DS, there was always one screen being used to show progression or a map, but later on, the idea of the second screen started to work in tandem with the first. Hold it horizontal like a book to solve problems. Send things from the bottom screen to the top. Watch as this screen takes all your money! It was a new way of playing games, and it gave developers a chance to experiment with different game types.
Imagine you had one way of doing things your whole life, and then your cousin comes in and offers a new way of living. It's the reason why I'm banned from my grocery store.
Stop eating the Goya beans!
I remember having to flip my DS for Bowser's Inside Story and having my mind blown. It was the first time I experienced reorienting the device as a means of switching up the gameplay. But it wasn't even just about the 2 screens either. The touchscreen also felt great to use thanks to the stylus.
Hello, little stylus.
Mario, help, I'm stuck in the stylus. PDAs and smartphones that could do corporate work had this exact same function, but instead of sending emails to the coworker you're having an affair with, you could instead play mini-games. But of course, the stylus wasn't the main contributor to the success of the DS. There was also the fact that you could play real games on it. I remember the same year I got my DS, I also got a copy of New Super Mario Bros. Commercials for this game showed Mario taking enough steroids to topple a building. But little did I know at the time, this was the first 2D Mario since Super Mario World, so people like my dad were interested in it. Imagine my shock when the man who was so sports-pilled asked to play on my DS. I just watched in awe as he did things I didn't even know you could do in the game, like pressing Y to run. So the DS was giving both young people and older veterans a reason to buy a DS, and things only got more enticing with the DS Lite.
Because let's be honest, the first iteration of the DS was not attractive, and people tend to agree with that. So Nintendo made a follow-up that was more sleek, more modern, more reminiscent on how tech looked during that time, and it was so popular the original model stopped production. I'd get rid of my kid too if their younger sibling was more popular.
And dude, I wanted this thing so bad. I had the original in blue flavored, but my sister had a DS Lite, and so did all my friends. I felt a bit left out, and bless my parents for dealing with my dumbass complaining about it, because for my birthday, I got my very own DS Lite. Yes, I was a very spoiled child. Moving on. It just felt so much better to play it, and play it did I do. I would even hide this thing under my pillow just so I could play it late into the night. There is just something about games on the DS that were unlike any other. While gaming during this time was at an all-time high, the offerings between each system were so similar to one another. Why should I get a PS2 if I already have an Xbox, or go and buy a GameCube if I don't like Mario? First-party titles aren't enough to sell your console at this point. The previous generation of consoles offered a different experience between each one. The PS1 had dual-stick gameplay, the N64 had true 3D games, the Sega Saturn existed apparently.
I can't can't speak on that though, the government doesn't like it. It was the first time each console manufacturer made a console that could offer the same experience across each one. Sure, you could have exclusives, but fan bases didn't get rabid about worshiping a company until the late 2010s. So how do you stick out during a generation when everyone's doing the same thing?
Do I really need to answer that? We've been talking about it this whole time! But the games that were on this thing were so different for its time. As mentioned before, New Super Mario Bros. Brought 2D platforming back to the Mario series, and it never went away! However, more unique ideas came out, like Nintendogs. People ate this shit up. Why give your child real responsibility when you can give them fake ones? It's all the work with less of the consequence. Nintendogs was oddly a better technical showcase for the DS than Mario 64 DS ever was. It showed the console's capabilities with graphics, utilized real in-game time as you had to check in on your pet every day, had you screaming into the microphone for commands, and used the touchscreen as a means to interact with your dog. I mean, it's like a real pet!
And if this told Nintendo anything, it was to market outside of your ordinary gamers. That's right, Nintendo was gonna try and market to the casual crowd.
Such a thing was never even considered. Before this point, gaming has always targeted people who are just into the medium. Yeah, the PS2 is the most popular console out there, but that's largely due to it being a DVD player as well. Xbox went hard on marketing to dedicated gamers, and Nintendo was just like there. So while Sony had families on a technicality, Xbox got all the racists in the COD lobby. That left Nintendo fending for the people who wouldn't typically play video games. And they somehow managed to do it. So many great games came out for this thing that everyone could play, both from Nintendo and other developers. Cooking Mama became a household name. Drawn to Life took your drawings and made them objects in-game. Scribblenauts had you solving puzzles by spawning in abominations. In Japan, there was Tomodachi Collection, which was a life sim with all your Miis that would eventually get a beloved sequel on the 3DS that everyone wants a sequel for.
And being delusional aside, it wasn't even just the new IPs being released that got people excited. Entries within well-established series were booming on the DS, so much so that this thing became the TSA's worst nightmare.
New entries in series like Mario Kart became some of the fastest selling to date. People will swear to this day that Mario Kart DS is still the best entry thanks to the more single-player modes within the game. Mario Party DS gave you plot and is a version of Mario Party with a truckload of charm. Brain Age. Everyone wanted Brain Age. It was just a fun series of challenges to do every day to get you really thinking. Pokemon saw a massive resurgence on this thing, no matter how often I don't want to play it. There was Rhythm Heaven, Professor Layton, Mario and Luigi. I mean, this is how I was introduced to the series. This console had so much variety, and it gave developers a chance to take a risk and be more creative with their games.
And this quality and experimentation follow within the new editions of the DS, and after that, the DS became something everybody had. There were games for people who wouldn't even touch a video game, and titles for people who would only play games to entertain themselves. It's safe to say that the DS was equivalent to an STD, something that you never knew you needed until you had it. Okay, so I just learned what STD means.
And this isn't even getting into the fact that the DS was a way to connect to people. Not only did games like Mario Kart have Wi-Fi allowing you to play online, but DS Download Play was by far the best way to play multiplayer games on a handheld device. One of my fondest memories in my early developmental years was playing Mario Kart with like 8 different people, all of different ages, in a hotel room we were all staying at. Everyone didn't even have to have their own game. Only one person did, and that was something you couldn't get anywhere else. And when we weren't playing these games, we were talking on PictoChat, sending each other goofy messages and silly drawings as a way to pass time before our parents came back. It was just so validating as a kid to have my peers be just as much into this device as I was.
Like, imagine just being able to pull out a DS, no games, but still being able to play multiplayer with someone else who had the game. That's unheard of in today's age. The DS, above all else, connected people in a way that hadn't been done before. And yeah, while smartphones were on the rise, this predates that and allowed kids such as myself to interact with others in such a safe way.
And I don't think Nintendo knew what they had when they first unveiled it. It was an unorthodox device, going against a lot of what you would typically do for a gaming device. 2 screens, a stylus, playing games for a whole other system that it didn't relate to. It was a wild shot in the dark, and making it look this ugly was especially bold.
Because when I take a risk, I make sure it's as ugly as possible. For example.
But it for sure worked. worked. Anyone could play it. There was just so many ways you could use it. It wasn't just for gamers. The success of it proved that you can't just make a device dedicated towards the people who play games. You have to make a device that is fun to play games on. That way, everyone's gonna want to buy it. This is reflected in the console wars we have today. No one's buying a PS5 or Xbox Series X, because those devices are catering to the people who already have most of what they want on their previous systems. But the Switch is a device that makes gaming fun again, and also convenient. Take this shit anywhere and easily play it with your friends on a whim. Nintendo realized this, and the DS was the start of shaping this company the way it is today.
Like, imagine just pulling out a DS, no games, but still being able to play multiplayer with someone else who had the game. That's unheard of in today's age. You're gonna see me with a beard in the next shot because I didn't know how to plan this properly. It showed Nintendo that the focus isn't graphics or hardware. It's making the games enjoyable, fun, and affordable. And does that sound familiar? The DS is likely what pushed them to go all in on the idea of the Wii, taking what made the DS work, a device that everyone can have fun playing and easily understand, and applying that to the home console. It teaches us that it's important to take these kinds of risks.
Say Nintendo kept trying to compete in the race of graphics and hardware. I think it's safe to say they would have failed. They had their minds made up on preventing piracy and making things more proprietary. So going down that route meant selling people on a more fun experience. It's something you don't see in today's world. While people were obsessed with power and graphics, it seems like we'd hit a plateau with how much we can improve. I mean, if the games on my PS5 look the same as my PS4, I wouldn't want to get it either. How is playing games on that device going to be different than here? Sure, load times might be faster, graphics might have a bump, but those are perks, not selling points. The Switch lets you take big AAA games on the go, and Joy-Cons make playing certain games a more creative and involved experience. Does the Xbox Series X with Game Pass offer that same fun experience, or does it offer more of what last gen gave us?
And I bring that up because it also applied back then. The DS outsold the PSP because while the PSP did offer console-level experiences on the go, it was just simply more fun to play on the Nintendo DS. Nintendo went against what they thought the market wanted. They showed that it indeed wasn't true and came out on top, risking it all just to do so. If we don't try and take those risks, take the opportunities to prove ourselves, then we'll end up just like the modern day consoles have, stale and unchanged.
So I decided I'm taking the risk I've always wanted. I'm going to become the world's best sign spinner. Hey, mister, I threw the sign up too high and it hasn't come back down.